Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're really going deep. This is a story about online influence and the crazy consequences that can come from, well, from narratives that go unchecked. We're looking at how just one person, maybe just one person's actions, might have actually had an influence on a mass exodus from Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's like a case study, we'll see how these online platforms today, just how much they can amplify just a single voice, and how even voices spreading misinformation can end up shaping what happens in the real world.
Okay, so let's get right into it. So at the center of all this is this guy, Martin Roy. He's this Cantonese-speaking internet influencer. He's based out in Dusseldorf, Germany. He kind of popped up, I guess, during the 2019 political unrest that was happening in Hong Kong. And ever since then, he's been stirring up a lot of controversy.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, to really understand the gravity of everything that's going on here, we need to kind of rewind the clock a little bit. So back in 2019, that political movement in Hong Kong, well, it led to a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. And so because of that, many citizens, they were worried about what the future would hold, so they just decided to leave Hong Kong. And when that happened, it created kind of a vacuum, a space where influencers, like OE, could step in and basically capitalize on all these anxieties.
So he was able to tap into this, like this really very real sense of vulnerability and fear that was like all over Hong Kong at the time. It's pretty chilling when you think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's even more complicated when you consider OE's background. So there are some claims out there saying that he may have actually sought asylum in Germany, but then he also says he's a British citizen, so it makes it really hard to figure out exactly who this guy is and what he's all about. What we know for sure is that he started this YouTube channel. It's in Cantonese, and he's got this, hardline anti-Chinese stance, which obviously it resonated with a lot of people who were already feeling pretty disillusioned with everything.
Yeah. It's like he found the perfect storm, events and existing sentiment and built this whole platform on it. So was anything he was saying actually true? I mean, these claims of fake news and conspiracy theories, those are pretty serious.
Well, yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? There's all these allegations, people saying that he just makes up stories and is just peddling conspiracy theories. For example, he said at one point that Hong Kong was about to go into this strict lockdown, and he was telling his followers to get out, flee before it was too late. And that led to this huge wave of panic. A lot of it was unnecessary. It probably made some people emigrate, like really hastily. And when that happens, people can end up facing really tough personal and financial consequences.
Wow, that's a lot. So he might have actually profited from people's fear and all this uncertainty.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's these other allegations saying that he was selling European-made masks to his followers back in Hong Kong during, like the worst of the pandemic. Sounds like he was just using all the fear around the virus to make himself some money. And then, get this, when some of the customers complained about, not getting their orders or whatever, he retaliated by putting their personal information online, like doxing them. That's potentially breaking EU GDPR laws, too.
Hold on. He doxed people just because they complained about not getting masks. That's really messed up. Sounds like he just wanted to shut down anybody who disagreed with him or tried to criticize him. Was there anybody else he was specifically targeting?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there were. And this is where it gets interesting. He would call all of his enemies hot dogs, which, I mean, it sounds pretty weird, but it's actually a derogatory term. It's connected to this political organization called Civic Passion and a guy named Wang Yukman. He was really obsessed with discrediting them.
Okay, so hot dog. It wasn't just a random insult he was throwing around. It was like a really targeted way to attack people he saw as political opponents.
Exactly, yeah. And then there's this other guy, Lao Ching. He's a lecturer at a university in Hong Kong, and he publicly challenged OE, disagreed with him on some stuff. And so OE just went after him, accusations, harassment online. He even went after Lao's wife, made up some wild allegations about her.
Wow, so he basically created this echo chamber, right? Anyone who disagreed with him, bam, they were attacked and discredited, which is scary because, that just shuts down any possibility of having an open conversation or debate.
Right, yeah. And these kinds of personal attacks, I mean, they can really hurt people's lives, their reputations. It's important to remember that, behind all these online personas are real people. And they're the ones that are really affected by this kind of behavior.
Yeah, it really is. It really shows you that dark side of, being an influencer online, how these platforms can be, I don't know, like weaponized to silence anybody who disagrees and create this totally distorted reality.
And what's even more, unsettling is that Owie seems to really know how to use these platforms. Like, he even brags about being a member of the UK Conservative Party. Like, he
Yeah.
shows off these communications with the party as if it's proof that he's got all these political connections.
Yeah, it is a pretty interesting tactic
Yeah.
because he's never even lived in the UK.
Nope. And even though he claims to be British, really proud of it even, he's been living in Germany, maybe even as an asylum seeker, who knows?
Hold on. So he's claiming British citizenship while maybe possibly seeking asylum in Germany?
Mm.
That's kind of contradictory.
Yeah, it is. And his German, well, it doesn't sound that great either. Like, his pronunciation, it makes you think he might not be as fluent as he wants everyone to think.
So there's this pattern, right? Like there's all this inconsistency in his story that makes you think, what's really going on here? Is this really about politics or is it something else entirely?
It's a good question. It's probably what investigators are trying to figure out, because Owei's actions, well, they haven't exactly gone unnoticed. Actually, Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption, the ICAC, they've issued an arrest warrant for him.
Whoa, an arrest warrant. Okay, now things are getting serious.
Yeah.
What are they saying he did?
Well, they're saying that he basically tried to get people to boycott the 2023 district council elections back in Hong Kong. Seems like he was sharing videos and stuff on social media, telling people not to vote. And the ICAC, well, they see that as him, deliberately trying to mess with the democratic process.
So all of his stuff online, it's escalated to the point where he might actually face charges. That raises a whole other bunch of questions, like how far does online influence reach? And how do we hold people accountable for what they do in the digital world?
It's tricky, right? Because we want people to have free speech, but then there's also, the possibility that someone could abuse that freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. This whole case is the perfect example of that, that tension. Makes you think about where we draw the line. Where does protected speech become something that's actually harmful? It also makes you wonder about, the responsibility of these online platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, they're giving people like Owie this loudspeaker, letting him reach all these people. But what are they actually doing to stop the spread of misinformation, to protect people from being harmed?
Yeah, it's a tough one. There's no easy answers. We want these platforms to be open and accessible, right? But then we also need to make sure people aren't taking advantage of that openness to do bad stuff.
So how do we even start to deal with this? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the first step is awareness. Cases like Owei's, they show us how important it is to think critically, to be media literate. We need to be aware of the tactics people use to twist information, to play on people's emotions, especially online.
Yeah. It's like we need to all become digital detectives or something, Learn how to spot those red flags and double check information before we just believe it.
Exactly. Question your sources, look for real evidence, and don't just, fall for those clickbait headlines or all that really emotional language. That's usually a good sign that someone is trying to manipulate you.
And what about, do the platforms themselves have a responsibility to do more? To combat all this misinformation and protect their users?
I think they definitely do. I'm all for freedom of expression, don't get me wrong, but these platforms, they have a responsibility to create an online environment that's safe. That might mean things like, fact-checking systems, algorithms that are more transparent, or even just stricter policies on hate speech and harassment.
Yeah. Sounds like it's going to be a tricky balance. How do we put those protections in place without stepping on people's right to free speech?
It's definitely a challenge, but I think we need to be talking about it, We need to be having these conversations about online ethics, about who's responsible for what happens on these platforms, and about how technology is shaping our world.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're at this turning point. We're starting to see how much power these online spaces have and that we need to think more carefully about how we regulate them and oversee them.
Totally agree. Cases like Owei's, they're a wake-up call. They're telling us that we need to be more critical, more careful about what we believe, and really engaged in creating a better digital world.
Yeah, this has been this deep dive has been it's been eye-opening. It's unsettling, this whole story. But it makes us think about some really important stuff. Online influence, how misinformation spreads, and, what our digital lives are going to look like in the future.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how many more are there? You
Yeah.
know, like how many other Martinoes are out there right now, like in the shadows of the internet doing this kind of stuff, manipulating people, maybe even shaping events, and nobody's holding them accountable. It's a scary thought for sure. And it brings us back to, like what can we do? What can each of us do? It comes down to personal responsibility. We can't just sit back and, just absorb whatever information comes our way. We got to be active. We got to question what we see and hear, especially when it's online.
So what advice would you give to our listeners, to
Mm,
people who are, trying to figure out how to navigate this digital world?
yeah.
How do we protect ourselves from all this misinformation and manipulation?
Well, I think it starts with being a little bit skeptical. Don't just take everything at face value. Do your own research, check different sources, look for sources that are actually credible, and be careful. Be really careful about people who try to use fear and anxiety to push their own agendas.
It's like we need to learn a whole new set of skills. Like we need to be digital detectives or something. We need a BS
Ah,
detector for the internet age.
I like that. Yeah, a BS detector. It's about thinking critically, recognizing when someone's biased, and, understanding how information can be twisted to try to make us think or act a certain way.
And remembering that even someone online, who seems harmless could be having a huge impact on what happens in the real world.
Exactly. Martin Oe's story, it's a really powerful reminder that what happens online and offline, those lines are blurring. What happens online can have huge consequences in the real world.
Yeah, this deep dive has been it's given us a lot to think about. It's a story that, I don't know, it's unsettling, but it's one that we all need to pay attention to. It makes us confront this like darker side of online influence and recognize that, we all have a part to play in making the digital world a more responsible and informed place.
Well said. I totally agree. If our listeners take away just one thing from this, let it be this. Be critical, be curious, and don't be afraid to navigate the digital world with some healthy skepticism.
That's great advice. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those BS detectors on. We'll see you next time.